It was 1:40 in the morning when the knock came. Not a light, polite tap, a desperate, uneven pounding that echoed through the hall like something broken trying to stand. I sat up in bed before I even knew I was awake. The clock on my nightstand glowed 1:40 a.m., and the house was still except for the rain ticking against the window. When I opened the door, the porch light caught her face first. My daughter-in-law, Claire, stood there barefoot, her cardigan soaked through, one side of her lips split open. Her eyes looked like glass, clear but lifeless, and she was clutching a torn purse against her chest like it was all she had left in the world. "Claire," I whispered, stepping closer. "Good Lord, what happened?" She flinched when I reached for her. I'd seen that flinch before. Years of teaching middle school had taught me how fear hides itself. But this wasn't a child. This was the woman my son married. Can I come in?" she asked, voice cracking on the last word. I opened the door wider, the cold night air pushing past me as she stepped inside. Her bare feet left small wet prints across my rug. When she crossed the threshold, she finally looked at me properly. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. Her voice broke again. She swallowed hard. "Ethan?" I asked, though I already knew. She nodded. I felt something deep in my chest tighten, not just fear, but something uglier. Because when a mother raises a son to be kind, to be good, and she sees proof he's not, it's a kind of death you don't come back from. I led her to the couch, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and went to fetch the first aid kit. When I came back, she was staring at the framed photo of Ethan on my mantel, the one from his college graduation. He had his father's jaw, that easy smile everyone trusted. "I didn't mean to come here," she said softly, her voice shaking as I dabbed her lip with a cotton pad. "But he changed the locks. He said the house was his now. He told me I'd get nothing if I left." I froze. "What do you mean, his house? You both?" She shook her head. "He transferred everything last month. Said it was just paperwork for refinancing. I signed because he said it would help our credit. He said he loved me." The pad slipped from my fingers. I'd heard my son say those same soft lies when he was 16, when he'd come home late and swear the dent in the car wasn't his fault. But back then, it was harmless. This was different. This was survival. "Did he hit you?" I asked quietly. She hesitated, then nodded once. "Not the first time." My throat burned. "Why didn't you call the police?" "He said no one would believe me," she whispered. "He said you'd take his side." That was the part that broke me, not the bruise, not the blood, but the idea that my son had used me as part of his cruelty. "I would never take his side," I said, and meant it. She started to cry then, and I just sat there, holding her, feeling her shake under the blanket. Outside, the rain softened into a slow drizzle, the kind that makes everything quiet. When she finally stopped, I asked, "Where is he now?" She looked down at her hands. "At the house. Probably asleep." I wanted to believe she was wrong. That maybe Ethan was just angry, drunk, out of line, that maybe he'd wake up sorry. But I knew better. I'd seen the paperwork too, months ago, when he'd asked me to co-sign a loan for his business expansion. I'd said no. He'd smiled that same easy smile, kissed my cheek, and said, "No worries, Mom. I'll handle it." He had handled it, just not the way I thought. Now I was looking at the result, a woman he'd stripped of safety and dignity to get what he wanted. I got up, went to the kitchen, and poured 2 mugs of tea. When I came back, she was staring at her phone. "He's calling," she said, showing me the screen. Ethan's name was glowing there, insistent. "Don't answer," I said. The call ended, then came again. "Turn it off," I told her. "You're safe here." She nodded, powering it down with trembling fingers. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The house hummed with the sound of the refrigerator, the clock ticking, the rain starting up again. Finally, I said, "You said he transferred everything. Do you still have the documents?" Her eyes widened a little. "Maybe in the car." I grabbed a folder before I ran. "Good," I said. "Tomorrow, we'll look at them together. If he used your signature without consent, we can reverse it. You're not helpless, Claire. You just forgot what you're worth." She gave me a weak smile. "I wish you'd been my mother." That sentence hurt in ways she couldn't know. Because the truth was, I had raised her husband. And if she was standing in my house like this, broken, afraid, betrayed, then maybe I hadn't done my job at all. She fell asleep on the couch, her breathing finally even. I sat in the armchair across from her, watching the rise and fall of the blanket, the soft flicker of the lamp. I couldn't sleep. My mind was 1,000 miles ahead, at the house she'd fled, at the son I'd thought I knew. I'd seen signs, of course. The sharp tone he used with her at family dinners. The way she'd shrink when he raised his voice. But I told myself all couples fight. That marriage is complicated. Now, looking at her bruised face in the light, I knew that was the excuse of a coward. At dawn, I slipped on my raincoat and stepped outside. The air smelled like wet earth and regret. The world was gray except for the single black car parked across the street, Ethan's. He was watching the house. I stood on the porch until he noticed me. When our eyes met, he rolled down the window, smirking. "Morning, Mom," he said. "Can we talk?" I didn't move. "Go home, Ethan." "This is home," he said, nodding toward my house. "You forget Claire's not your responsibility. She's my wife. I'll handle her." "You already have," I said. He laughed softly. "You always dramatize everything. She gets a little upset, runs to you, and suddenly I'm the villain." "She's bruised, Ethan." He sighed, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. "She fell. She drinks more than you think." That lie hit me harder than I expected. "You stop right there," I said, stepping closer. "Whatever's happening, it ends today. You come back here, and I will call the police myself." He smiled again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. "You should get some rest, Mom. You're not young anymore. Stress isn't good for you." He started the engine, waved like a son saying goodbye after Sunday lunch, and drove away. I stood there until his taillights disappeared. The rain started again, steady this time. When I went back inside, Claire was awake, holding a yellow folder. "I found the papers," she said. "They're worse than I thought." Inside were 2 deeds, one for their house, one for the property I'd left Ethan in my will. Both had her signature, dated, notarized. But the handwriting on one was off, a little too perfect, a little too neat. "Did you sign this one?" I asked, pointing to the second. She shook her head slowly. "No." He said it was for taxes. "I never saw this page." My chest tightened. "Then he forged it." She nodded. "He's trying to get your property too. He mentioned your house. Said everything should stay in the family." I looked at the deed again, my name, my late husband's signature from decades ago, and now a new one added below it, hers. It wasn't just greed. It was erasure. He wanted to make us both disappear, me through senility, her through silence. I closed the folder carefully. "Then we're going to make him regret ever thinking we were weak." Claire blinked, surprised. "What are you going to do?" I smiled, not kindly, not bitterly, just cold and certain. "The same thing he did. We'll use his own paperwork. Only this time, we'll make sure the signatures tell our story." I looked at the clock. It was 8:12 a.m. The day had officially begun. Before she could speak, the doorbell rang again. We froze. She whispered, "It's him." I didn't answer right away. I looked toward the door, where a shadow moved across the frosted glass. Then I took a breath, straightened my cardigan, and said, "Let him in." Because when I opened that door again, I learned the bruises were only the beginning, and the real wound was waiting in the papers he'd already signed himself. I opened the door with my hand still damp from the tea kettle. Ethan stood on the porch like a salesman who already expected a signature. He had on that tailored coat he wears when he wants to look respectable and a smile that didn't touch his eyes. The porch light made a hard line across his face, and behind him the rain softened the world until everything looked washed out, everything except him. "Morning, Mom," he said brightly, stepping forward like the house belonged to him. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd pick up my wife. Claire's breath hitched behind me. I didn't move from the doorway. "Your wife is resting." "Resting?" He chuckled. "We had an argument, that's all. She gets dramatic." He leaned around me, looking into the living room like he might spot her on the couch. "Come on, Claire. Grab your shoes." She stayed where she was, blanket to her chin, eyes on me. I closed the door enough to block his view. "You can talk from the porch," I said. "You won't be coming in." He shifted the tone in his voice the way you shift a car into a lower gear for a climb. "Mom, please. You're making this bigger than it is. Let's not embarrass the family." "The family is already embarrassed," I said. He exhaled slowly, and the smile fell away. "Fine. We'll do it the other way." He reached into his pocket and took out a folded paper, the kind with a blue notary stamp in the corner. He held it up to the glass, proud as a boy with a report card. "This is a quitclaim deed. Claire signed it. The house is mine. She has 30 days to relocate if she leaves without cause." Behind me, Claire whispered, "I never saw 30 days." I stared at the stamp and the signature that looked like hers if you'd only seen it once. "You brought a piece of paper to my door at 8:15 in the morning and expect it to make you right?" "I expect it to make me legal," he said. "And legal beats emotional every time." "Not when the law sees the bruise," I said. His jaw flexed once and settled. "I told you," she fell. "And I told you to stop talking," I said, and my voice came out so calm that he blinked. "Go home, Ethan. Come back with a lawyer if you must. Do not come back with threats." His smile flickered back on, artificial as a mole candle. "Mom," he said gently, "you raised me to handle problems. That's what I'm doing. If you get confused by all the papers, I can help you. We should simplify your accounts, too. I noticed you still keep balances in 3 different banks. That's risky." He'd crossed an invisible line then. My hands went cold. "You noticed," I said. "How?" He lifted a shoulder. "Everyone goes paperless now. Passwords are a pain for you. I'm only trying to make things easier." "By logging into what isn't yours?" I asked. He didn't answer. He looked over my shoulder at Claire again. "You have one chance to come with me without making a scene," he said to her, slow and careful. "Don't make me call someone to come get you." "Who?" I asked. "The police." He held my gaze. "If I say my wife is unstable and the situation is unsafe, they'll come." The last of my patience left the room. I stepped outside, pulled the door so it clicked behind me, and stood with him in the wet morning air. "Call them," I said quietly. "Please do. I would like an officer to see her face. And while they're here, we'll show them the message you left last night shouting on the voicemail. We'll show them the text you sent 3 weeks ago, the one where you said, and I quote, 'Sign it or your stuff will be on the lawn.'" He paused. It was small but it was there, a click of surprise. "You don't know what you're doing," he said. "I do now," I said. We looked at each other for a long moment. Rain dotted his coat. My hair curled in the damp. Inside, I could hear the clock in the front hall, steady as a kind heart. He tucked the paper back into his pocket. "I'll be back with a car," he said. "And next time the conversation won't be so neighborly. Next time there will be more people present," I said. "And they'll be wearing badges." He gave me that almost sad look he perfected in his teens, the one meant to make me feel guilty for being firm. Then he turned and went down the steps. When I closed the door, Claire was standing. "I'm sorry," she said. "I shouldn't have come." "You came to the right place," I said, and I meant it with every bone I had left. "I made oatmeal because you can't fight on an empty stomach." She ate 3 bites and pushed the bowl away like food was a language she'd forgotten. I set the yellow folder on the table between us and opened it again. "We need to look carefully," I said. "All the pages. All the stamps. The dates." She nodded, wiped her eyes with the edge of the blanket, and leaned forward. The quitclaim deed was dated 2 Fridays ago, notarized by a name I'd never seen. The refinance papers were older, with both signatures, hers shaky in a way that could be nerves, his steady. A marital asset allocation agreement sat near the bottom, and the title alone made my stomach tighten. "I don't remember signing this," she whispered. "Then you probably didn't," I said. "Or you signed a different page and he substituted this one later." "How do you know that?" "Because I've been on the receiving end of a switch before," I said. "Not with a marriage, but with insurance papers. It happens faster than people think." The doorbell rang again. We froze, then both breathed when it turned out to be my neighbor, Mr. Ortiz, holding a soggy newspaper. He's old enough to remember my son's first bicycle and stern enough to scare teenagers off his lawn with a look. Your boy was parked across the street before sunrise, he said, stepping inside without waiting. I don't like that. Neither do I said. Mr. Ortiz, this is Claire. He tipped his cap, took one look at her face, and his mouth went flat. Do you want me to stick around a bit? He asked. Just sit on the porch and read the sports while you two do whatever it is you're doing? I would appreciate that, I said. He grunted like it was settled, took his hat off, hung it on the coat tree, and went to the porch with the paper held up like armor. Through the glass, his back looked like a wall. Claire exhaled in a shaky laugh. You have a guard. I have a neighbor, I said. There's a difference, but today it's the same. At 10, I called my sister Lila, because she has the kind of voice that makes a person breathe slower just to listen. Tell me everything, she said. Leave nothing out. I did. She didn't interrupt except to ask twice, what exactly did the paper say? And who signed where? When I finished, she said, I'm coming over. And I'm calling Marla. Who's Marla? Legal aid, she said. She handles housing and elder issues. She's a bulldog who wears ballet flats. At 11, Lila walked in with an umbrella, a reusable grocery bag, and a woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and a calm mouth. This is Marla Quinn, my sister said. She's nice until she needs not to be. Marla listened. She took notes with a pencil, not a pen, and I liked that. Pencils are for people who expect to adjust the plan when new facts arrive. She didn't flinch when Claire told her about the bruise. She didn't dramatize when I told her about the parking across the street. She looked at the papers for a long time and then said, okay. Here's what they're trying to do. And here's what we're going to do first. They? Claire asked. Marla tapped the quitclaim deed with the pencil. The notary on this is from an outfit I know. They stamp everything that moves. If she witnessed, it has to match a log. If it doesn't, that's a problem for them, and an opportunity for us. The refinance is likely valid because you signed, she looked at Claire, but the allocation agreement looks like it was swapped. We'll request original scans with metadata from the title company. If they can't produce a clean chain, he's the one in trouble. She turned to me. And if your son is angling to get at your property later, we cut that off now. We file a notice at the recorder's office that any deed on your parcel needs in-person verification by you with ID and a second witness. It's not standard, but clerks help when they see risk. What about today? Claire whispered. He said he'd come back. Marla slid her card across the table. You direct all contact to me. If he shows up, you call the police and say 3 words, ongoing domestic situation. They'll come faster. Don't open the door unless you want to. He can talk through wood. Claire's shoulders dropped a fraction. Lila made us all sandwiches because she believes no woman thinks clearly on an empty stomach either. By noon, the quiet fell into a rhythm. Mrs. Ortiz's wind chimes, Mr. Ortiz's occasional cough from the porch, the pen scratching across Marla's legal pad. Then Ethan called my phone. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. Then he sent a message. Mom, you're being manipulated. She's making you pick sides. Family should be united. Don't make me do something we'll both regret. I handed the phone to Marla without a word. She nodded, saved the message, and wrote coercive language on her pad. At 1:30, Shame entered the story through a polite door. My pastor, Reverend Cole, texted to ask if everything was okay. Ethan stopped by the church this morning, he wrote, and said Claire was struggling with drinking and anger. He asked for prayers for your safety. I stared at the words until the screen went dim. Then I set the phone down and said out loud to the room, my son told the church I needed protection for my daughter-in-law. Marla touched my arm. People who manipulate systems don't just file papers, she said. They file stories. We counter both. Lila called Reverend Cole from my phone, put it on speaker, and said calmly, Pastor, this is Lila. I'm with my sister and her daughter-in-law. Claire is safe here. There is no drinking problem. There is a bruising problem. If you are asked for character statements, please decline until we send you a formal one. And if my nephew comes back to you with more stories, direct him to an attorney, not the pulpit. To his credit, the pastor didn't argue. He sounded shaken. I didn't know, he said. I'm so sorry. No now, Lila said, and ended the call as gently as you can end a thing like that. At 2, Ethan returned, this time with a woman in a pencil skirt and a hard smile. She carried a clipboard and the confidence of someone who wins arguments by repeating the same sentence louder. I met them on the porch. Mr. Ortiz didn't get up from the chair. He just lowered his paper and watched like a hawk with bifocals. I'm Ms. Dalton, the woman said, showing me a card. Family mediation. Ethan thought we could resolve this quickly. Family mediation is for family who listens, I said. He's here to serve papers and spin stories. That's not mediation. Her smile didn't change, but her eyes turned colder. If Claire doesn't return home, we'll be forced to note abandonment. She was forced out last night, I said. Changed locks. Bruises. Pick your order. We have different accounts of that, she said. We have different facts of that, I said. Our facts come with photos and a doctor's appointment at 3. Then we'll see you in court, she said crisply. We might see you sooner, Marla said from behind me, stepping through the door with her card pinched between 2 fingers. I'm counsel for Mrs. Hart and for Claire as of 10:48 this morning. Please refrain from direct contact. All communication goes through me from now on. Ms. Dalton's gaze dropped to the card, then rose to my face like I'd betrayed some unspoken rule. You brought a lawyer into a family matter, she said. No, I said. My son brought a lawyer when he shoved a quitclaim deed under a bruised wife's nose. I brought light. They left with the stiff backs of people who forgot the porch has witnesses. Inside, Claire held her breath like she'd been underwater. I can't do a courtroom, she whispered. I can barely do this room. You won't be alone, I said. You have 2 rooms worth of women in here. At 3, we went to urgent care for documentation. The nurse was gentle in the way that makes you want to cry because you forgot that gentleness exists in the world. She took photos, made notes, and asked Claire if she felt safe. Claire looked at me and said, now I do. The nurse nodded, printed a report, and said, keep this. Copies for your lawyer, the police, and if you end up there, the court. When we came out, the late afternoon sky looked like a bruise fading at the edges. We drove home the long way to make sure no one was following. They weren't. The world had returned to ordinary traffic and people who didn't know our names. At 5, my phone pinged again, this time an email from a title company with a string of letters and numbers. Per your request, it read, attached are the original scan sets of the deed exchanges for 14 Hilson Way. Marla opened the files on my old tablet and zoomed in on the metadata. Look, she said, tapping. The document you signed was 1 page. The document they filed is 3. The added pages were scanned 4 days later from a different device. So he swapped them, Claire said, voice small but steady. So he swapped them, Marla confirmed. That quitclaim deed won't hold when we show chain contamination. At 6, after soup and quiet, someone knocked again, softly this time. Mrs. Harris from 2 houses down stood holding a casserole under a rain bonnet. I heard shouting earlier, she said, eyes flicking toward the street. I don't know what's going on, but I wanted to say I'm sorry if I ever repeated anything he told me about you, Claire. He made it sound like you were trouble. That wasn't fair. It surprised me, how much those words mattered. Claire thanked her in a voice that trembled but didn't break. When Mrs. Harris left, Marla said, see. We pull his stories up by the roots, the soil looks different to everyone. By 8, the house was quiet again. Lila made up the guest room for Claire like she was settling a small bird, fresh pillowcase, the good blanket, the lamp turned just so. I stood in the hall and watched a life rearrange itself into a shape that held. When I went back to the kitchen, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. The transcript popped up a minute later. This is Officer Hardy returning a call regarding a wellness check request. We spoke with Mr. Ethan Hart and advised him to avoid the property unless invited. We'll document the visit. If you need anything further, call the non-emergency line. Marla smiled without much humor. He tried the police. The police tried prudence. At 9, we planned. Marla laid out steps as simple as a recipe. Tomorrow, recorder's office to file a notice on your parcel, and bank to add a requirement that any changes require your in-person signature and a passphrase. Then we draft a petition for a protective order for Claire, plus a temporary financial restraint to freeze any funny business. We'll also send preservation letters to the notary and title company so they can't lose logs and scans. Claire's eyes widened. That sounds like war. Marla's voice softened. It's defense. And defense looks like war when you've only ever had to run. When she left, the house seemed to exhale. Lila hugged me so tight my ribs felt counted. You did good today, she whispered. I kept thinking I had failed years ago, I said. Watching him on that porch, I thought, where did I go wrong? You raised a son. He chose a road, she said. Today you chose yours. After she went to bed, I sat alone at the table with the folder open and a pen in my hand. I wrote a list the way I used to write lesson plans: objective, materials, procedure. Objective: keep Claire safe. Keep my home safe. Tell the truth where lies were planted. Materials: papers, photos, names, dates, people who show up when it rains. Procedure: we do not argue at doors. We do not sign anything under pressure. We call first. We write it down. We stand together. We never say it's not so bad when it is. I underlined the last line until the paper thinned. Then I added one more: we stop being a story someone else tells about us. Near midnight, I walked to the front door and checked the lock even though I knew it was set. I looked through the peephole at a dark, empty street. The lemon towel in the kitchen shifted in the air from the vent, a small bright border in a house that had known too much gray. I went back to the table and folded the quitclaim copy into an envelope marked Marla. I labeled another for the recorder's office. I stacked my driver's license, Claire's urgent care report, and a list of contacts with phone numbers. I sharpened a pencil because sometimes you need the sound it makes to remind you you're not fragile. I poured the last of the tea, held the warm mug in both hands, and felt something steady return to me. Not anger, though that was there, honest as a bruise. Not grief, though that too would come and go. No, what returned was the part of me that knows how to handle a room when things might break. The teacher, the mother, the woman who has seen storms and learned how to stack towels under doors until the water stops sneaking in. Ethan had said legal beats emotional every time. Tomorrow I would show him that truth beats both. And if he wanted a scene with papers and witnesses, I would give him one, just not in my doorway. Keep watching, because at sunrise I stopped waiting for his next knock, and I took our stack of proof to the first office that could make a stamp sing on our side. The sun hadn't fully risen when we pulled out of the driveway. The world was washed in that early gray-blue light that makes even ordinary houses look haunted. Claire sat beside me, clutching the manila folder like it was the last warm thing she owned. I'd packed 2 thermoses of coffee, a folder of documents, and enough quiet resolve to make it through whatever waited for us. Mr. Ortiz waved from his porch as we passed. You ladies take care, he called. We will, I said, and meant it. The county recorder's office opened at 8, but we were there by 7:30. The guard was still unlocking the doors when he saw us waiting. You early birds here to make trouble or prevent it? He asked with a half smile. Prevent it, I said. If we can. He chuckled, held the door open, and said, then you're my favorite kind. Inside, the office smelled of old paper and floor wax. A young woman behind the counter greeted us, her hair tied in a neat bun, her nails painted lilac. She looked tired but kind. Morning, I said. I need to file a notice on my property. It's about deed protection. She blinked. Oh, like an owner alert? We can set that up online. I prefer to do it in person, I said. I've seen enough screens lately. Her mouth twitched into a smile. Fair. What's the address? As I recited it, I felt my hands stop shaking. It's strange how something as simple as saying your own address can feel like reclaiming your ground. She printed a form, slid it across the counter, and said, sign here, initial here. This adds a restriction. No one can file a new deed without your physical presence and ID verification. You'll get an alert for any activity. Claire watched the pen move across the paper like it was magic. Maybe it was. Sometimes power looks like ink drying where someone else can't erase it. Can I do one too? Claire asked softly. The clerk nodded. Of course. It's your name on the other property. Claire looked at me, then at the clerk. It was, she said. But it won't be for long. The woman's eyes softened. Then let's make sure it is again. By the time we left, the sun had turned golden, and a little warmth crept into the morning. I could see color returning to Claire's face, not much, but enough to notice. Now what? She asked as we climbed into the car. Now, I said, we get our accounts locked down. At the bank, the manager was a tall man in his 30s with short sleeves and a cautious expression. His name tag read Ben, Assistant Branch Manager. I explained that I wanted to add a passphrase and require in-person verification for any account changes. He nodded like he'd been expecting that kind of request lately. Identity fraud is everywhere, he said. Good call, ma'am. He glanced at Claire. Do you want to do the same for your joint account? It's not joint anymore, she said quietly. He hesitated, then said, let's separate it officially then. The process took almost an hour, signatures, verifications, security questions. Each page I signed felt like another door locked against what my son had become. When we finished, Ben leaned forward. You've done the right thing, he said. And if anyone tries to reopen those files, the system flags it. You'll know before they do. I thanked him, and for a second, I thought about telling him who we were fighting, my own child, but I didn't. Not yet. Some stories need to build quietly before they're believed. Outside, Claire turned her face to the sun and took a deep breath. It feels like the first safe day in months, she said. Good, I said. Because now we start the hard part. Marla met us at her office around noon. It was a small place in a converted Victorian house downtown. Creaky floors, potted plants, framed thank you cards on the wall. You two made good time, she said, standing when we walked in. She looked like she hadn't slept but still carried the sharpness of someone who thrives on purpose. We did the filings, I said, handing her the stamped receipt from the recorder's office. She scanned it, smiled, and said, perfect. That gives us leverage. Now we start digging. She motioned for us to sit. On her desk lay a printed timeline of everything so far, dates, transactions, witness names. It looked like a war map. First, she said, we submit a complaint to the State Notary Commission. The signature mismatch is enough to open an investigation. If they find irregularities, the deeds he filed are invalid. Second, we file for an emergency protection order for Claire. That stops him from contacting or approaching either of you. Third, we prep for a restraining injunction on financial access. You still share some overlapping accounts, right? Claire nodded. The mortgage auto-pays from both names. Not anymore, Marla said, typing. We'll notify the bank that the joint authorization is revoked. From this point on, you control half, the rest is frozen until the case settles. I watched her fingers move, efficient, fearless. What about his lies? I asked. The ones he's spreading? Marla looked up. Those take longer to kill. But we'll get there. He's creating a reputation trap, making you look unstable, so if you fight back, people think it's emotion, not evidence. We counter that with paper. People forget, but ink is louder than gossip. Claire whispered, he told the pastor I was violent. Marla sighed. Classic deflection. He'll say you're unbalanced, that you're exaggerating. So we keep records of everything. Dates, calls, messages. Even silence. If he stops contact for a while, that's strategy too. She handed Claire a spiral notebook. Document every interaction, no matter how small. If he sends an email, print it. If he calls, note the time. That notebook becomes your voice when fear tries to take it away. Claire nodded slowly, clutching the notebook to her chest. Marla looked at me next. And you, write your own statement. Be honest, even about the guilt. Especially the guilt. Judges respect truth, not perfection. I nodded. I've taught enough students to know the value of an honest essay. That made her smile. Good. Then you'll do fine. After we left, Claire insisted on buying lunch. We found a small diner near the courthouse, all chrome and faded red booths, the kind that haven't changed since 1975. She ordered soup, I got coffee and toast. I can't stop thinking about how he used you, she said quietly, stirring her spoon. He told me you wanted the house in his name. He said you were tired of paying property taxes. My throat tightened. He said the same about you. That you were reckless with credit cards. That he had to take control before you sank you both. Her eyes filled. He's been writing both sides of the story. Yes, I said softly. And he's forgotten that readers eventually notice the handwriting. We sat in silence for a while, the clink of dishes filling the space. Then she said, "Do you think he knows we're fighting back?" "Oh, he'll know soon," I said. Because by then, I had already decided something I hadn't dared say out loud. I was going to make him face what he'd built. Not just with lawyers and papers, but in front of the very people he'd lied to. That evening, after we got home, the phone rang again. It was Reverend Cole. "Mrs. Hart," he said, voice gentle but uneasy. "I've been thinking about what your sister told me. Would you be willing to meet tomorrow? I think there's been some confusion about Ethan's story." "There's always confusion when one person lies," I said. He hesitated. "He's been visiting a lot. He told me you're unwell, that Claire's manipulating you." I didn't know what to believe. "I'll bring you proof tomorrow," I said. "And maybe you can decide for yourself." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk with the lamp on low and reread the documents again, the fraudulent deed, the fabricated signatures, the timestamp metadata. My mind played back every memory of Ethan as a boy, the way he'd come home muddy from the creek, the time he lied about breaking the neighbor's window and swore he'd never do it again. I remembered holding him when he cried after his father died. I remembered thinking he'd grow into someone strong and kind. And now I was preparing to face him as an adversary. The ache of that truth was worse than any courtroom. At midnight, Claire appeared at the doorway. "Can't sleep?" "Not really." She sat across from me. Her eyes were still swollen, but there was something steadier there now. "You keep blaming yourself," she said. "But he made his own choices." "I know," I said. "But knowing doesn't stop the echo." She nodded slowly. "I used to think I could fix him. That if I just loved him the right way, he'd stop needing to prove everyone wrong." "That's not love," I said softly. "That's survival." She looked down at the papers on the table. "What if he finds another way to hurt us? Then we'll find another way to stand." Morning came fast. We drove to the church first, not to beg for understanding, but to reclaim our names. Reverend Cole met us in his office, his Bible open but untouched. "I've known Ethan for years," he said. "But when I saw you both together now, I see something different. I see fear in her eyes, and I see anger in yours. I should have asked questions sooner." "It's not your fault," I said. "He's good at making people comfortable. He learned from me." Claire handed him a copy of the medical report, the photos, and the notarized letter Marla helped us draft. "He told you I was violent," she said quietly. "He didn't tell you he changed the locks while I was inside packing a bag." The pastor's expression darkened. "If he comes here again, I'll tell him to leave. You have my word." "Thank you," I said. When we walked out, Claire whispered, "That's one less person believing his lies." I nodded. "And one more believing the truth." By afternoon, we met with Marla again to finalize the filings. She smiled when she saw us. "You've both been busy," she said. "That's good. Tomorrow's hearing is just for the temporary order, but it'll set the tone." Claire's hands trembled slightly. "Will he be there?" "Most likely," Marla said. "He'll act calm, maybe smug. Don't react. The more polite you are, the smaller he looks. Remember, predators feed on chaos." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "We can do polite. We can do calm. But we're not doing silent anymore." Marla grinned. "Then you're already halfway there." That night, I cleaned the house like company was coming, not because it needed it, but because I needed something to do with my hands. Claire helped me polish the dining table. "He used to sit right here," she said softly. "He won't again," I said. Outside, thunder rolled low and distant. Inside, the air felt charged, like the moment before a verdict. I made one last list before bed. Copies of documents. Court folder. Emergency contacts. Courage. Then I turned off the lamp and whispered to the quiet house, "Tomorrow, my son meets the woman he thought was too soft to fight. Because he didn't just bruise his wife. He bruised the truth, and that I intended to heal. The courthouse smelled like old wood and coffee gone cold. The kind of place where secrets didn't vanish, they just waited for someone to swear on them. Claire and I sat side by side in the second row, the folder of evidence between us. She kept her hands clasped in her lap, the faint marks on her wrists fading to pale yellow. Her breathing was shallow, but steady. Marla stood at the table ahead of us, arranging papers like a chessboard. She looked calm, but I'd come to learn that calm in women like her meant ready for war. Then he walked in. Ethan. My son. He wore the same grey suit he'd worn to his wedding, though it fit tighter now. Arrogance and guilt add weight in strange places. His hair was slicked back, his wedding band gone. A woman followed him, the same mediator from the porch, clipboard in hand, whispering like she was feeding him lines for a play. He didn't look at me at first. When he finally did, it was with that faint smirk I'd seen since he was a boy who thought he'd outsmarted everyone. Marla leaned over. Let him have his moment, she whispered. The higher he climbs, the harder the fall. The clerk called the room to order. The judge, a woman in her 50s with sharp glasses and a sharper stare, entered, sat, and nodded for us to begin. Ethan's attorney, Ms. Dalton, went first. Your Honor, this case is an unfortunate misunderstanding between family members. My client, Mr. Hart, was simply attempting to manage household finances when his wife became emotionally unstable. There was no coercion, no fraud, just miscommunication. I felt Claire flinch beside me. Marla placed a hand on her arm, grounding her. Then it was Marla's turn. Your Honor, what my colleague calls a misunderstanding is a pattern of control, psychological, financial, and physical. We have documentation of fraudulent signatures, bank interference, and a recorded admission from Mr. Hart himself. Recorded? The judge asked. Marla nodded and pressed play on her laptop. Ethan's voice filled the courtroom, calm and cold. She doesn't even read what she signs anymore. It's easy. The sound of it hit me like a hand to the chest. Ethan's smirk flickered. His lawyer stood quickly. That was taken without consent. Marla didn't blink. In a one-party consent state. Perfectly legal. The judge gestured. Continue. Marla displayed the notarized deeds on a large monitor. As you'll see, Your Honor, these documents were altered days after Mrs. Hart's signature was obtained. The metadata shows 2 separate devices, 2 scan times, and 1 consistent beneficiary, Mr. Hart. My clients request immediate revocation and protection from further interference. Ethan stood. She's twisting everything. I was trying to. The judge cut him off. Sit down, Mr. Hart. For the first time since he walked in, his voice lost its rhythm. He sat, muttering something I couldn't hear. Marla continued, showing side-by-side photos, one of Claire's bruises from urgent care, the other of the deed metadata. Control doesn't always come with fists, Your Honor. Sometimes it comes with pens. The judge looked at Ethan. Do you deny forging or altering any signatures? He hesitated, too long. I don't recall the details. I handle a lot of paperwork. That's an answer, not a denial, the judge said dryly. Claire squeezed my hand under the table. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She sat straighter than I'd ever seen her. Then Marla turned to me. Mrs. Hart, would you step forward, please? My heart pounded. I hadn't expected to speak, but maybe I should have. After all, this wasn't just Claire's fight, it was mine too. I walked to the stand. The bailiff swore me in, and I sat, the microphone too close to my breath. Marla asked gently, Can you tell the court what happened the night Claire came to your home? I nodded. It was 1:40 in the morning. She was barefoot, bruised, and shaking. She said Ethan had changed the locks and taken her name off the house. She said he told her she had nothing. Ethan exhaled loudly through his nose. I ignored him. Marla continued, How did you respond? I let her in, I said simply. Then I realized he wasn't just taking from her. He was taking from me too. My property. My trust. My peace. The courtroom was quiet enough to hear the clock tick. And what did you do then? I found people who still believe in paper trails, I said. And I followed them here. A few people in the back smiled softly. Ethan's lawyer rose. Mrs. Hart, you're clearly emotional. Is it possible your memory is? Don't, I said before she could finish. My voice came out steady, quiet, final. I am 78 years old, not senile. My memory is fine. My son has been rewriting our family story, and I came here to correct the spelling. Even the judge paused before hiding her expression behind a sip of water. Ms. Dalton frowned, flipping through her notes. Did your son ever say he intended to harm you or his wife physically? No, I said. He didn't need to say it. Fear doesn't always announce itself out loud. The lawyer's mouth tightened. She sat down. Marla looked at the judge. No further questions. When I returned to my seat, Claire whispered, "You were incredible." I shook my head. No. I just stopped lying for him. After recess, the judge called both parties back. I've reviewed the evidence, she said. The signatures don't align. The metadata clearly indicates document alteration. The court grants a temporary restraining order in favor of Mrs. Claire Hart and Mrs. Ruth Hart. The quitclaim deed is hereby void pending investigation. Ethan's lawyer shot up. Your Honor, if we could. No, the judge said, firm. And Mr. Hart, if you approach either woman or their residence, you will be held in contempt. Do you understand? He stared at her, his jaw tightening, then muttered, Yes, Your Honor. But when the judge dismissed us, he didn't leave quietly. He turned toward me, that same teenage fury in his eyes. You just destroyed your own son, he said under his breath. I looked at him evenly. No, Ethan. You did that all by yourself. The bailiff stepped between us before it could go further. Outside the courthouse, the air was heavy with humidity, the kind that holds the promise of rain. Claire leaned against the railing, eyes wide but shining. We won, she said softly. For now, Marla said, gathering her folders. The final hearings next month. But the hardest part is over, you've been believed. Claire smiled weakly. That's everything. I looked back at the courthouse doors where my son had just walked out, shoulders tight, phone already pressed to his ear, calling someone, spinning another web. Marla followed my gaze. He's not done, she said. Men like that rarely stop when the court tells them to. They stop when the world sees who they really are. I know, I said. And that's what comes next. We drove home in silence. The porch light was still on, though it was barely 4 in the afternoon. The house smelled of lemon polish and coffee, small comforts in a world that had cracked open. Claire went upstairs to rest. I stayed in the kitchen, replaying every moment, his smirk, the judge's words, the way my own voice didn't tremble when I faced him. I thought of the boy I once raised, the one who used to bring me dandelions from the yard and call them flowers. I thought of how love turns to silence when it's betrayed too many times. And I thought of justice, not as revenge, but as a kind of medicine. It doesn't heal the past, but it stops the infection from spreading. When Marla called later that evening, she sounded satisfied. Good news, she said. The notary has already confirmed she never witnessed those signatures. She's cooperating with the state. That means fraud charges are possible. I closed my eyes and exhaled. Thank you. Don't thank me, she said. You did this. You showed up. After we hung up, I went to the window. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that hums after thunder. Across the road, a car sat parked under the street lamp. For a moment my chest tightened, but then I saw it wasn't his. Just a neighbor. Still, I locked the door again. The clock read 9:47. I brewed one more cup of tea and sat at the table, hands steady. The storm outside had finally broken, rain tapping against the windows. In that moment, I didn't feel broken or afraid. I felt alive. Like something inside me had shifted, from apology to authority. My son had come to court thinking he'd win with lies. But truth had its own handwriting. And the next morning when the papers arrived on my doorstep, unsigned, unstamped and left without a note, I realized something even bigger. He wasn't done trying. But neither was I. The envelope sat on my porch like a dare. No address. No return name. Just my own written neatly in the center, my handwriting, traced. I brought it inside and set it on the table. The rain had stopped hours ago, but drops still slid down the window, each one catching the gray morning light. Claire came down the stairs, her hair still damp from the shower, eyes curious and wary. "Is it from him?" she asked. "I'd bet my last breath it is." I opened it carefully, half expecting more false papers, another trap dressed in legal language. But it wasn't that. Inside was a single page. Typed. Short. "You win. I just wanted what was fair. You'll regret ruining your own son." No signature, but he'd left his mark, the arrogance that always mistook punishment for fairness. Claire leaned closer. "That's it." "That's it," I said, folding it neatly. "He wants me to feel guilt. He still doesn't understand that guilt isn't love." We sat in silence. The air smelled of coffee and rain-soaked earth. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel afraid. Just tired, in the honest, earned way that comes after a long fight. A knock came around noon, and my heart jumped before I even stood. But it wasn't him this time. It was Officer Hardy, the same one who'd handled the wellness check. "Good morning, Mrs. Hart," he said. "Just wanted to update you, your son turned himself in last night. The district attorney's office is charging him with forgery and attempted fraud. They'll contact you if testimony's needed." Claire gasped softly. "He turned himself in?" Hardy nodded. Apparently the notary and title company both cooperated. Once the chain of evidence came through, he realized there wasn't a hole big enough to crawl through. Thought he'd get ahead of it. I thanked him. He tipped his hat politely and left, the sound of his boots fading into the distance. When I turned back to Claire, she was staring out the window. "Do you think he's sorry?" she asked. I thought for a long moment. "No," I said finally. "But I think he's cornered. And sometimes that's the only way truth gets its turn." She nodded slowly. "What happens now?" "Now," I said, "we live." The weeks that followed felt strange, like walking through a house that had been rearranged in the dark. There were no more late-night knocks, no more threats, no more papers arriving without names. Just small, ordinary things, the smell of cinnamon toast, the sound of the kettle, the peace of hearing nothing at all. Marla stopped by one afternoon with a thin folder. "Cases closed," she said, smiling. "Deeds reinstated, fraud recorded, restraining order permanent for at least 5 years. He can't touch a cent that isn't his." Claire's eyes filled, but this time the tears looked like relief. When Marla left, we sat at the kitchen table again, the same table where all this began. The sunlight came through the curtains in warm, lazy stripes. Claire reached across and took my hand. "I keep thinking about that night," she said. "If I hadn't driven here, if you hadn't opened the door." "You'd still have found your way," I said. "The difference is, this time someone opened it sooner." She smiled faintly. "Do you miss him?" "Every day," I said truthfully. "But missing someone doesn't mean wishing them back. It just means remembering who they were before they stopped listening." One evening, a month later, I found myself on the porch again. The air was soft, humming with crickets. I watched the stars blink awake above the trees and thought about all the doors I'd opened and closed in my life. When I was younger, I used to think motherhood meant forgiveness, that love should always find a way to excuse, to understand, to heal. Now I know love sometimes means closing the door and keeping it locked, not out of hate but out of survival. Sometimes love is the quiet decision to stop bleeding for people who keep handing you knives. Claire came out with 2 mugs of tea and handed me one. "Marla called," she said. "The notary's been disbarred. The judge signed the final order." "Good," I said softly. She sat beside me. The porch light buzzed faintly above us, moths circling in its glow. "You ever think we'll forgive him?" she asked after a while. "I already have," I said. "Forgiveness isn't letting him back in. It's letting myself sleep again." She smiled. "I think I'm starting to understand that." We sat there a long time, 2 women who'd survived the same storm from different directions. The air smelled like wet grass and peace. Inside, the clock ticked the way it always had, steady and soft. And for the first time in months, I realized I wasn't waiting for anything, not an apology, not an ending, not even another knock. Because sometimes, Justice isn't loud. It's quiet. It's the sound of a house that finally feels safe again. When betrayal comes from your own blood, it doesn't just test your heart, it tests your memory, your strength, and your will to stay kind. But truth, once spoken, has a way of finding its way home.